A fourth branch of government. There are currently 3 branches of government in the official sense in countries of the Republican type. This is done for the separation of powers into independent bodies to provide checks and balances on the power of government. Interestingly, the branches don't simply reflect arbitrary choices on the separation of powers, but how the different powers of governance in and of themselves intrinsically differ. Lawmaking or legislature is a different type of act and thus a different kind of power than execution, which is administering the laws, which itself is a different kind of power and act than judging on the application of laws and enforcing them. The 3 branches currently employ themselves in filling the gaps of and engaging in the basic activities that the governing body of a nation ought to intuitively engage itself in order to manage society. As we're thinking of sophisticated advancements to the management of society, though, we can imagine activities related to that management that in theory do go beyond the 3 categories of acts covered by the 3 branches. The domain of activity I want to discuss where the government and its 3 branches currently play no part, but are nonetheless affected by, is the domain of dialectics, namely a discourse on the true nature of things. True meaning true in the objective or most objective sense of the word. Scientific truth, philosophical truth, true nature of things in lived experience, cultural truth, societal truth, truth of this nation, truth in this world, and truth in this universe. The idea of having a branch of government dedicated to a thing of such enormity as truth may seem hilariously romantic to many people. Before you jump to that judgment, I have to explain the idea. Both the flaws of the current system's management of dialectics and the plan for how this 4th branch would actually work. The 4th branch would not be and was never intended to be a ministry of truth, an institutional body whose purpose is to simply decide in private what truth is and then how to impose it on the people, an association of concepts that's rather typical of liberal thinking. The irony of this assumption is that this form of government body dedicated to truth is the same as the executive branch because it's the executive branch that has ministries and ministers. It's interesting that when you talk to someone about the government having a role in truth-seeking, or a role in truth, the immediate assumption is that this would be some sort of, any kind of truth affirmation on the part of government would take the form of an institution of administration that simply decides on what things are or get to be through raw executive force. You know, much like how the president, the executive branch, and all its departments function on a daily basis. It's interesting that the immediate assumption is that there should be some sort of ministry of truth, rather than something more legislative. Executive branch, they don't elect or deliberate or do things in the open. They simply decide on things, and the people bear the decision, and that a ministry of truth would also likewise not elect or deliberate or do things in the open, but simply decide on things and have the people bear the decision. No, this is not what is intended. Let me be clear. This is not what a dialectical branch of government will be like, for the very simple reason that the form of the branch itself has to be dialectical and not executive. Whereas when you consider something as odious as a ministry of truth, you are thinking of a body whose form is executive rather than dialectical. The core idea here is that the form the branch and its institutions take itself has to be different from the other 3 branches in order to constitute a 4th branch of government, not merely its mandated objective. The form is different, not just the goal. The current form of the 4th branch is completely decentralized. No, indeed, a 4th branch already exists. It's even a term used for how the press, the people, and interest groups influence U.S. Congress and the other branches. Now, this is plain and obvious. The people, the press, and their discourses, ideas, and values influence government. But how is this dialectical? Well, the cultural discourse surrounding politics and political values is itself at least implicitly dialectical. This dialectic is playing out as people of different values and beliefs about truth come together to discuss and defend what they think is important to society. In common parlance, this is referred to as the culture war between the right and left. The reason it's called a culture war and not a cultural dialectic is because the dialectic has been exacerbated by various forces and taken on a tense, toxic character, hence culture war. Getting into why this cultural dialectic has become like this and reached these levels is beyond the scope of the video, but the point is, whether it's going well or not, it's clear that a cultural dialectic of sorts is always in play and always guiding the common social fabric to a decision on values that ultimately affect government. But the cultural dialectic regarding truth is decentralized. Government plays no role in it. The discourses over matters of truth happen throughout society, and they happen at all levels, in the family, among friends, on forums, in journals, in academia, etc., wherever. All these discussions matter in the sense that all contribute to the awareness or beliefs about truth in the minds of individuals in a very interactive system where each individual's opinion has some weight in contributing to the common beliefs among the majority or large factions of people, which plays a role in influencing the legislative branch of government. When I think about who guides the dialectical forces of society, I normally imagine three categories. You have the people, the press, and academia. Together, these constitute the market of truth. The chief problem with a completely decentralized market of truth is that the market has no accountability to anyone over the spread of wrong or misleading opinions. If large swaths of people start to believe wrongful things, their opinion has a direct influence on legislation without having to be apprehended by any dialectical process that could correct them. This happens on both the left and right. The press also has a failure of accountability, seeing as institutions of the press, once they reach a certain size and reputability, can print out all sorts of articles that do damage to the cultural fabric before being apprehended. Imagine any news article on a dramatic mainstream event. The effect of the article in the minds of the people, or the effect it has on the dialectic, whether it skews left or right, is done by the article being put out before the article can be contended against by rigorous dialectical scrutiny. It's simply the fact that in a liberal society, opinions can be shared, and opinions being shared has a weight on the world, even if those opinions are not yet scrutinized by any dialectical process that precedes them being shared out. Even academia, which is the most centralized of the three categories, has the most safeguards before something is printed, is still highly imperfect when it comes to dialectics, and especially when it comes to anything dialectical pertaining to political values. See my Bob Altmaier video for a great example of that. In some sense, academia is even more dangerous because it's even more reputable, and if a peer-reviewed article comes out on any particular topic with a definitive X is true affirmation, the people are bound to listen. But the discourse of truth is never done, even if a peer-reviewed paper is written. In fact, peer review has various flaws. Peer review, for one, depends on the number of peers available, and sometimes you're not going to have enough peers, so the reviews may have a small range of opinions. Peer review is not always double-blind, so reviewers may see the name of the author, and if they're well-known, that may bias their decision. Also, reviewers themselves have biases because, of course, reviewers are still people, and if a paper agrees or disagrees with their own thoughts, it affects their decision. And the editor of a scientific journal has to decide who to take seriously. But ultimately, beyond all these points, even after something is peer-reviewed and printed, it does not mean the debate is over, because there will still be feedback to come out afterwards from other researchers who may or may not disagree or publish their own smaller papers after the fact contesting the results of a previous paper, or a longer-term overall trend. You may see conflicting research come out as new data is collected on the same subject. A great example of this is, again, Bob Altmaier writings I reviewed on the channel, where Altmaier wrote a book about right-wing authoritarianism, but then decades later you see papers coming out about left-wing authoritarianism contesting Altmaier's assumptions. Heck, you may even have cases, it's even possible, that the entirety of academia may agree that something is true, but are in fact wrong, and the onus is on the people that are non-academics to realize it and contest them. The point is, the topic of truth is never settled. The last reason, though, that this decentralized market of truth isn't good enough is that when it comes to political truth, it's a gross liberal world assumption that we are only interested in the truth about facts when we are also interested in the truth about values. The assumption of liberal society is that facts are facts and values are values, the two are separate, and values, being subjective, are not something we can dialectically contest. As I've said before repeatedly, I reject this idea. Values, even though they differ between people, are not subjective, but are objective and are thus every bit fair game for dialectical discourse as the facts of the matter. This matters because it's usually the values that determine the conclusion an expert will push onto the public. It's not enough for someone intellectual and credentialed to put out an opinion on some topic, for their values guide their conclusion. Whether these values were influenced by their rigorous work or whether those values were what influenced their research in the first place. In any case, it usually takes an expert that's equally credentialed but with opposite values to come forth and challenge the former in a debate to see the essential truth of the matter on display in dialectical form. See James Flynn versus Charles Murray on IQ for a good example of that. Only after seeing experts of equal but opposite values contest the facts does the public have a full sense of the dialectical range of plausible opinions and conclusions on the subject. Only after that do they see how complicated the truth really is, and how it cannot be summed into a single direction of political truth with a single opposing falsehood. But this only happens after experts of diverging values agree to debate, and their debates gain prominence enough for the public to see what's up, which is of course extremely rare since people of opposing values, right and left, seldom wish to debate the issue as they emotionally may not want to apprehend values they find unpleasant. Some of you may see where this is going. As I'm laying out the problems, the solution's also becoming clear. You want to see discourses that most pertain to the dialectical truth of the subject, that being the highest level expertise-bearing conversation on the topic from multiple positions of opposing values, because what we know about opposing value systems is they conceal and downplay various unpleasant-feeling facts. They don't simply dismiss the opposing narrative, they dismiss facts pertaining to that narrative also, which may be facts regardless of whether the narrative they serve is true or false. Example being the debate about the morality of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The fourth branch of government is, in rough terms, intended to be a massive debate house, or a dialectical forum, since a dialectic is different than a debate. The purpose of this forum is to decide on matters of truth rather than to pass laws, and to do so in a public way where any opinion can be rightfully admitted into the forum and allowed its turn in the arena of discourse, and in a way that pertains directly to the operations of other branches, so that the work of government in general must adhere to the official truths that are determined by the forum. Consulting our knowledge of political science, we know the legislative branch tends to be the most flexible of the three current branches, its key influencer being the voters themselves. The fourth branch is bound to be even more flexible in what it can put forth, seeing as its scope of concern is literally all areas of truth, but must be far more rigid in terms of what its decisions suggest. Because the fourth branch is literally the truth branch, each decision or conclusion is attained through a rigorous dialectic. It naturally acts as an objective decider on things, a counterweight to the more subjective legislative branch, which merely makes decisions based on the subjective will of electors at a given time. In order to integrate a truth branch of government, I propose the following system. First off, the main activity of the fourth branch will be the dialectical forum, an official, physical house of debate and deliberation that is part of the government. The difference between it and other debate houses or forums you may see online or on podcasts or wherever in society, or even in history, is that the purpose of its deliberations is to obtain objective truth and to be the highest house of dialectical deliberation in the nation. No other forum, podcast, debate, arranged debate between individuals, or debate hosting organization can function as the highest level of deliberation in the country. The dialectical forum must follow three key tenets, or pillars. 1. Attain the complete truth on a subject in as granular a level as possible. 2. Publicize the deliberations on matters of truth to the public. A huge must that every deliberation in the debate house is publicly visible the same way that the U.S. House of Representatives have a live broadcast for their sessions. And 3. If a dialectical forum finds certain law or policy idea and determines through its many levels of deliberation that the idea is true and actionable, it needs to be passed into law, the immediate assent of the other branches is required where no constitutional violation is present. Let's go over these in detail. The purpose of one is obvious. The forum is of course a debate house whose topic is truth. Its purpose is to obtain the truth on whatever subject and to never be wrong, and if it ever is wrong, it must adjust itself in order not to be. And in order to accomplish this, the forum will employ two primary types of functionaries, deliberators and dialecticians. The role of deliberators will be to deliberate on a topic. As in the case of the two experts of opposing values having a discourse, the dialectical forum will need to invite various debaters or deliberators in order to discuss an idea, with experts with opposing values especially in order to solve the issue of opposing narratives concealing opposing facts. The hope being that due to this being a public forum of enormous magnitude and prestige, the brightest minds and deepest thinkers will want to come to the forum and have their say. The deliberators in the forum could thus in theory be anyone in the populace, which itself is a convenient way to tie in the interest of the people, seeing as the people themselves have no direct say in the deliberations of Congress. Deliberators who perform well will rise in rank and be able to deliberate at higher levels and on more important topics. They will usually deliberate in groups of two, thesis and antithesis, though in theory you could expand deliberations and have more than 2 people per session. I should clarify here that we should call them deliberators and not debaters, as the function of the forum is to deliberate rather than to debate. The connotation of debate in our modern internet culture has become corrupted, and debate is now seen as a kind of informal battle done primarily for drama, to see who can verbally humiliate their opponent, or simply a rhetorical contest, whereas the purpose of deliberation, no matter how dramatic it may be, is always on finding a common and objective truth. That being said, it doesn't mean that deliberations won't sometimes take on the character of debates, as that may sometimes be unavoidable. Listening to the deliberators will be a set of what are effectively judges or adjudicators, but in our terminology we should call them dialecticians. These will be experts who know the deliberative topic intimately in terms of the best arguments for and against a given position, and are trained to weed out logical errors, inconsistencies, gaps in data, failures in argument formulation, and bad assumptions. They are not there to take any particular side of either deliberator, but to judge on what the common objective truth of a given deliberative session is. This common truth may be the position of one deliberator or his opponent, or neither, or both, or some combination thereof. The important thing is that the dialecticians take no position themselves. They simply rule on which position carries forward up the chain to the next level of deliberation. In order to prevent bias, dialecticians need to be trained in assessing logic, validity, soundness, and the thoughtfulness of arguments. They also need to be trained in suppressing their own personal values on the subject, similar to how judges need to be impartial when making a ruling. A bias which, of course, can only be suppressed so far. Furthermore, we should caveat that no person can serve as a deliberator and dialectician at the same time. They can only be one or the other, and the qualifications to become each are different. While deliberators will typically be various opinion havers, thinkers, writers, academics from the public who may not need to be employed by the forum full-time and can return to their work when they're finished, dialecticians may be judges, lawyers, or former deliberators who prefer to settle in a functionary role and care less for proving themselves in the forum. This way, the forum mixes both expertise and public involvement, which gets to our point 2. The public gets to enter into deliberation, and while of course not everyone from the public will be allowed in, as even the most entry-level deliberators will have to meet certain criteria so as not to waste the forum's time, the public still gets a chance to participate. Meanwhile, the ultimate decision of the forum's opinion on a given topic will be decided by trained experts in the forum's activities. In this way, the branch combines both subjectivity and objectivity, while the other three branches, these forces are kept separate, with the legislative bearing all the subjectivity and the judiciary bearing all the objectivity. The public, of course, gets to watch and participate in discussion while deliberations are happening. All deliberations are publicized and publicly broadcasted. Given the potential size of the forum and the multiple tiers of deliberations it may host, you may have a situation where many streams are necessary in parallel to display the deliberations happening at once. In a way, this would be like a live streaming platform, but strictly for dialectical discourses of the highest caliber. On top of the public being able to watch, the mere fact of them knowing the forum exists and what goes on there is enough for the public to start to think critically about their own opinions on objective truth. In a completely decentralized system, it's easier to dismiss experts and institutions as not knowing what they're talking about or operating out of selfish private interest. But in a system with this forum, people will now be exposed to how much opinion having actually matters. Opinion having won't simply be a private thing with private consequences, with the influence it has on government being some far-off, unlikely possibility or something with meager weight on the outcome. They instead will see their own opinions taken by their favorite expert and discussed in public on a massive stage, with lawmaking and government-altering consequences on the table. They will see how truth, their truth, is connected to the great body of society at large. The influence of the people on government may actually be improved by this system, and where the people err for not knowing or understanding the functionalities of government, the forum will also fill the gaps as the experts and deliberators are there to lay everything out on the table so the truth is both known and explicitly expressed. The third tenet pertains to the forum's effect on other branches. Because the forum's domain of concern is meant to apply to all areas of truth, its scope is in theory far greater than any other branch of government. Indeed, the other three branches are all concerned with just laws, either lawmaking, law implementing, or law judging. But the fourth branch may deliberate over issues not pertaining to laws at all. It may deliberate public culture issues, philosophical issues, informal social issues, etc., areas not pertaining to any kind of lawmaking whatsoever. What then be the purpose of such debates? The system should work as follows. The forum will be divided into two primary sub-branches: the upper house, which is actionable, and the lower house, which is non-actionable or neutral. Any topic that does not pertain directly to lawmaking, but nonetheless pertaining to moral truth, i.e. anything philosophical, cultural, social, axiological, religious, etc., shall be relegated to the neutral sub-branch. Whereas topics directly related to lawmaking and on how a correct law should be passed, or what would be a correct law to pass, or the proposal of a new law altogether, or how to correct a certain incorrect law or less than correct law that had been passed by Congress prior, etc., shall be discussed in the actionable sub-branch. You may ask, why should the non-actionable branch exist at all? It has to exist because the purpose of the forum isn't to simply create laws, it's to establish and endlessly pursue objective truth. Truth is the goal of the forum, not laws. Laws are just the form that truth takes once we figure out how to materialize it into this world, meaning all rough topics and issues in the forum, on the most primitive level, must start out in the neutral branch and work their way up to the actionable one. The key procedure performed by the forum will be that at a certain point, once a given dialectic on some topic has matured and gone through various rounds of deliberation and been assessed and recorded and ruled upon by enough dialecticians, it will be promoted to the actionable branch. The actionable branch will then, at its first round of deliberations, take a recently promoted topic and have deliberators decide on how to convert it into a law or some kind of formal ruling that can be put into action by other branches of government. Once this newly promoted idea on truth has been formalized into something with legal structure, it shall be deliberated on in further arenas on the efficacy and morality of it as a law. Deliberators will be able to discuss a law's consequences, a law's potential possibility of achieving results, the hidden agendas behind the law, etc. In a way, the actionable branch gets to do what the House of Representatives already does, but in a far more drawn-out and thorough fashion. Whereas U.S. Congress must pass laws and must make decisions in reasonable time and follow various rules of procedure to keep the government machine running and to pass laws into action, they are not bound to dialectical truth. Furthermore, while the legislative branch does debate and deliberate over topic and issues in the process of lawmaking, these debates are incredibly superficial, simplistic, and bereft of the dialectical complexity innate to anything resembling objective truth. The debates may also just be a formality, as the decisions of the upcoming vote have already been made by each representative in their mind. They are just going through the motions. They debate things in Congress, but not to attain truth, but rather to lay things out rhetorically so that the House may vote, and the vote may decide where things go so that the work may continue. Thus, the actionable branch in the forum does act like a legislature, but its limitation, unlike Congress, is that it is bound to a dialectical process. Its deliberations and decisions must necessarily be slow because unlike Congress, which simply has to make a decision, which it has the power vested in it to do thanks to the Constitution, the forum has to be right in its decision. The entire setup of the forum is to ensure that every ruling, every law, every idea that gets passed is as close to objective truth as possible. Because of this, and the elongated process by which ideas first need to be promoted up the tiers to even be considered laws, the decisions of the forum are going to be made slower, but must innately carry more power and weight in them than the decisions made by Congress. Thus, the final tenet that binds the branches together is that the decisions made by the forum are decisions other branches must assent to unless a gross violation of the Constitution is present. Giving this new body power over the legislative branch in Congress may seem very dangerous at first, but should be counterbalanced by the fact that the forum will be making rulings and passing laws very rarely and very slowly, unlike Congress, which will be passing them very quickly and very often. There also need to be additional caveats relating to certain emergency powers of Congress where it may not need to assent to the forum, especially when the forum cannot come to a decision quickly enough, such as declaring war. There may also be exceptions where Congress or the President can veto a ruling made by the forum, but the exceptions shall be limited in scope so as not to deprive that branch of the power its rulings rightfully ought to have. And lastly, of course, seeing as everything in the laws of the land is determined by the Constitution, there may also need to be exceptions where the judiciary can decide upon the rulings of the forum and determine them to be unconstitutional. We may yet dive deep into these various exceptions and various limits placed on the powers of the forum by other branches, and also from within, since after all, it would be absurd for the forum to be able to pass and decide absolutely anything, like for example dissolving the government. However, the powers of the forum will be great, since the forum will be able to amend the Constitution and it won't need 2/3 of Congress to do so. We should caveat here that the inner workings of the forum still need a lot of further development, namely the subject of how an idea gets admittance to the forum, how one should become a deliberator, how an idea gets promoted to actionable, how many ideas the forum can deliberate over at a given time, and how the absurdities of the forum can be vetoed by other branches, since absurdities always exist in human discourses. If these details were fleshed out, you would have a workable government model that is truly dialectical rather than simply Republican. I would also caveat one last thing, that no apparent size of the forum or weight or power of this centralized dialectic by any means negates or cancels the existing decentralized informal dialectic playing out among society at large in the people, the press, and academia. We by no means wish to cancel the existence of the market of truth not under government control, since a centralized institution of truth, no matter how rigorous and sophisticated its operations, will never be able to capture the whole truth of the universe, and where it leaves off, the people, i.e. the market, has to step in. Furthermore, in the possible long-term scenario where the forum becomes an institution that is decayed and corrupt, it will be up to the people, once again as it always is, operating through their own ideas to dismantle and overturn this unworkable body. Now that I've laid out how this interesting new body within government would work, let me go over why I think it's necessary. On top of the various benefits of having a government and society itself at large more tuned into the idea of objective truth and built around its pursuit, and the benefits this pursuit will have to the cultural fabric, and as well as reducing the flaws of not having a formal dialectic in our society for truth, whereby truth is apprehended in this concealed, subterranean way where people's undisclosed beliefs remain unchallenged but still affect the outcome only, there is yet an additional reason why this fourth branch should be attempted. That is the reason of political division. The truth is that in our current political moment, there is an enormous amount of political division, and one of the reasons for it is that it is very, very, very difficult to discuss truth with anyone where truth means challenging their beliefs and values. The division between left and right is now very wide, so wide perhaps it may threaten to tear society apart. This may be a threat not only in America but throughout the West, and if it turns out to be the case, then it means Republican democracy was never designed to handle this level of internal friction and division, and political division that isn't caused by external conditions either, or anything material, but caused entirely by divisions in people's thoughts and ways of thinking. I can't delve deep here into why I think this is the case, but I do believe the division is driven by the mind, not the body. The differences are differences in ideas, not differences in conditions. So it's coming from something internal rather than external, which means you need to have a tool that handles that internal friction specifically. Through technology and the internet, the modern world has given people lots and lots of time to think and express their thoughts, but it has not given them the tools to resolve differences in their thinking. Those differences need to be confronted and addressed. By being open to any kind of discussion topic, the Dialectical Forum explicitly adheres to the principle of free speech. By being the ultimate decider on things, it attracts the brightest opinion havers on all sides of the political spectrum. And by being the highest, most sophisticated debate house in the country, it has popular interest for every mind and every intellectual. All meaning what? Meaning the Dialectical Forum is designed perfectly to address and confront those major differences in thinking that exist within the populace that are driving political division as we speak. Its entire function, back to front, is what solves our current culture war, or prevents a future one, or puts off the chance of one caused by moral decay in society. The Dialectical Forum is the crucial public tool to confront unflinchingly and relentlessly the uncomfortable conversations and discourses we fear to have due to wokeism, identity politics, political extremism, and any other manner of political divergence. Because its very purpose is to confront truth, it doesn't matter how uncomfortable that political conversation may be in real life. In the forum, that very conversation is what's expected. And because its mandate is truth, nobody can use the appropriateness and inappropriateness politics to shut down any conversation, since in the forum they don't care how inappropriate something is, only how untrue it is. And because the forum has so much power, it's too big to ignore, unlike the academics, press, and people whose opinions you disagree with. The Dialectical Forum will help make the informal dialectic playing out between the left and right formal, and with that we are one step closer to solving the divide between those two sides for good.